Hopefully you're a returning viewer. If you're not, welcome along to the channel. This is going to be one of the sewing videos. I do these every other week. And this time it's something that we need to do a lot, which is adjusting clothes to fit. Because none of us really are off the peg, size-wise. And if you're like me, you're going to find that a lot of the clothes that you buy just don't fit the way that you want them to. Probably because if you're like me, you're quite fussy about what you like. I really like, as you've seen from quite a few videos, red trousers. I'm one of those people. And I'm not ashamed to admit it. Red trousers are fun, deal with it. So I picked up some red chinos, which were originally John Lewis. They were listed as being the size that I should be, which is a 34-inch waist and a regular leg. Now, regular is one of those sizing things that doesn't make a great deal of sense. My body type is not average. I'm probably slightly below average height. I have a long torso and short legs. But if I buy trousers that are labelled as short, they're always far too big in the waist. Or they have such a weird cut on the legs that I have to adjust the legs anyway. So I always buy regular, they're easier to adjust for me because I just need to take the bottoms off them. That said, the modern trend towards lower and lower waists makes it more and more difficult to get an accurate measurement. The trousers I bought are a 34-inch waist, but they don't come anywhere near my waist, they sit on the hips. So that's annoying too. That's something for another video probably. So what I'm going to show you in this video is how to fix clothes that don't fit properly and how easy it is. It's not really that difficult to adjust clothes a lot of the time. As long as you can get something that fits roughly the right size for you personally, you can generally move things about a little bit. And if you're buying second-hand clothes, that's even better because then you've not got that expense of cutting up something brand new. You've got something where if you make a mistake, it doesn't matter too much. So if you're looking at doing this first time, pick something up second-hand from a charity shop or online or wherever you find second-hand clothes. Get something in the closest size to what you are that you can, and just bear in mind that if it goes wrong, it doesn't matter. If it goes wrong, all you've done is you've learned something, and it means that you can have another go with another pair, or the same pair of trousers if it's trousers, or whatever it is that you're doing. Failing is part of learning, and there's absolutely no shame in it. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Thank you for joining me, and hopefully you'll subscribe, you'll hit the like button, and you'll leave a comment. I do really appreciate that, and I do like reading people's feedback and seeing what people like and what they'd like to see more of. Let's sort out these hems. Because of this being a fairly stable fabric, by which I mean wherever you put it, it stays there, I decided to just turn up the cuffs and then take the trousers off without pinning or marking anything, because these cuffs were very stable, they didn't move. If you have a fabric that's a bit slippier, then it's best to put a couple of pins in. If you've got a helper, even better. I'm doing this on my own. And then it just means this doesn't move when you take them off. So our next step is to actually mark where we need to turn these up to. Now, I'm not going to mark at this top edge here, because whenever I've done that in the past I've got confused and then I've moved this line all the way up here. So what I do instead is I find the side seam and I put a pin in on the fold, and I do that only on the fold because I know from the shape of these trousers that this fold line is where they naturally sit. So when I actually go to the next stage, I know I can fold it here and there'll be a nice even hem. Now on the cuffs on chinos, they're done a bit like jeans, so I suppose the best way to think of them is like lightweight jeans. You've got the same overlocking on the edges as most modern things do to prevent fraying, but what you don't have is the French seam that jeans have. So on this one it looks like they've overlocked the two layers of fabric together. Sometimes they do it separately. It looks like this is all the same process, so it'll be slightly more tricky to split this, but we might not have to. What I will do first is I'm going to take off this top stitch here, so that because I don't think I'm keeping that, I think I'm going to lose that particular detail. I'm not a big fan. So we'll unpick that, and then we'll turn these up the right way, and I'm going to base stitch them. And once I've got that, I'll try them on, I'll see if I'm happy with the fit and how they actually hang on my legs, and if they're a funny shape, then we'll look at splitting this seam. Now, I know some of you prefer to use stitch rippers. I prefer to use a sharp pointy pair of scissors for this because I don't know whether it's me or what, but I always end up with the points breaking off stitch rippers. And because these aren't jeans, the thread is lighter weight, so it's much easier to split. And that's where it overlaps, so you have a couple of layers of stitching there. Now, there was enough fabric to make these into turn-ups, but I generally find that when you make turn-up cuffs on trousers, it's better if it's a lighter weight material than this. So there you go, that pops off that hem. And then with your pins that we've put in here, you can see them just through the fabric there, just about. I now put a pin in from the outside in exactly the same place. There's my new marker. Take the ones out from the inside. Just to make it easier for you to see, I'm going to turn the leg inside out. And all you do is roll the cuff up. So the pins are at the top. And the trouser leg falls naturally into place. Now, one thing you can see with this is there's not quite the same amount of fabric. This side particularly, there's a lot more fabric to get into that gap. So we are going to have to split one of these seams, probably the outer seam, because otherwise that isn't going to lay flat. That's just going to bunch and it's not going to look very nice. This is our inside seam, and I'm going to split the outside seam to sort this out. The really frustrating thing with overlocked seams is they're quite strong, so you can't just tear them like you would that cuff seam. Let's do it this way. Now I'm only going to go as far as the pin, because we might not be changing anything above that point. It might just be that we need to take this excess out of that seam, because then, there you go, you can see when you put this flat now this is the very slight taper. So this point's nice and straight, but this is what was bunching up and preventing us from turning the leg. Now that we don't have that problem, I can baste this down, and then we can look at how much we need to trim off and how this leg actually fits. It's always best to use a high contrast thread for doing this, so I'm going to use white because it shows up really nicely. Then when you need to pull out those basting stitches, it's very easy to see them. The reason for using basting stitches rather than pins, although pins will work if you don't want to go to the trouble of this, is the fabric will move more correctly because you won't have these little bits of metal in it. So it will hang as it wants to hang naturally. There we go. Just using a little needle for this one. And when you baste this, you want to just be careful you don't go through all the layers together. We're only going through the one side. And basting stitches are very, very loose, very basic. Their only job is to hold this together, so it's just a long, loose running stitch. If you're not back stitching, I grab through the fabric like that, and then just pull, and you end up with quite long stitches like that. Quickly tie off the end. Okay, so with that now basted, you can take your pins out. And then we turn the trouser leg the right way out. And then you can see your basting stitches from the outside there. So I'm going to quickly try these on and see how this sits and see if I'm happy with this lower leg. I've got a feeling it's got a slightly ugly flare to it, but I won't know till I put it on. So if you're wondering, the shoes will become clear in a minute. Well, first impressions are that's not too bad. I was expecting to have to take the seams in, but honestly, they feel comfortable. They move about like I'd expect, and they don't taper. I think. Let's try them with some shoes on, because that can affect things a little bit. Yeah, I mean, that is about how I like my trousers to fit, so that ended up being less work than expected, because sometimes what happens is when you raise, and I thought it was going to happen with these, when you raise the hem, they sort of flare out like that, and it can look really goofy, especially when you're taking as much off as I have on these. The other problem is if they're tapered in the other way, you sort of get trousers that go down and then suddenly do that just at the bottom. These don't do either of those things, they fit and move nicely, so that's been a lot easier a modification than usual. Sometimes you get lucky with it. So what I will do now is turn up these hems and sew them down properly. Now turn the trousers inside out. Our next problem is going to be dealing with this side seam here, because we know if we go too far up we're going to get some strange bunching. The other problem that we have is this is far too much fabric. This is an enormous amount of fabric. You don't want that in the hem of your trousers. So I'm going to bring this down to a line that's already here, which is this seam line here. Because if I take it there and then fold that in, that becomes your hem instead of that. So happily, we've already got the cut line to go along from the previous stitching. So that's what I'm going to do. Then on the sewing machine, I'll turn the hem the right way out, I'll re-sew this line here, and then I'll do the hem by hand. Recently managed to find myself something I've been after for a long time, which is some decent shears. They're only little ones, they didn't have the bigger ones in stock. These, amazingly, they're sharp, they seem good quality, and they were less than £15 delivered. Because of the way that I'm doing the hem on these, there's no need to use the pinking shears, and there's no need to do any overlocking or serging on these edges, because all of the edges are going to be hidden, so they're not going to fray, which is just as well, saves me a bit more work. So all we do is this seam that we split here, that's all the loose thread from the previous overlocking. And we'll just sew this back together on the original line. Put some pins in. So you turn that around that way. It still lies nice and flat. And then, if you pretend I've already sewn this, all you're doing is rolling that inside, and then I'll do like a triangular stitch on here which has a bit of movement, rather than doing it by machine, because I don't want any visible stitches, and my machine doesn't do fancy invisible stitches for hems. It really doesn't take long to hand sew a hem anyway. I'm not using the Singer. There's nothing wrong with the Singer. I just had this machine. This is a machine that was given to me, and the person who gave it to me had no use for it. It was just a spare. They didn't know if it worked. It's not as refined as the Singer, but it is by one of the oldest sewing machine manufacturers, Jones, who were bought up by Brother, who are still going, obviously. And I think this machine is from the 60s, very early 60s. The colour, the style of it, that sort of thing. I've not been able to find out for definite. And it's a Model 105. The really nice thing is this one actually comes with all of its paperwork, and it even comes with things like the original oil blotting cloth, which is quite remarkable. The phone numbers, look how short they are, and that gives you some indication of how old this machine is. Phone numbers have not been that short for quite some time. There you go. Old-fashioned integrity since 1859. So yeah, they've been going for quite a while. Since this is only a quick job, and you might not have seen one of these before, I thought it'd be fun to use this one instead of the Singer, just for a change. Let's bring you in for a closer look on. So unlike the Singer, instead of that very, very delicate vertical dial where you can select how many stitches per inch, on this one it's just this really big, really nice to use actually, clunky dial. The button there is for going in reverse. You do have to hold that in when you're actually sewing. It's a bit fiddly to use reverse on this machine. The one thing that's a slightly confusing thing is it does say foreign on it. And as far as I can work out, even though these were sold in the UK, they weren't all made in the UK. So that just seems to be a quirk of this machine. It's got a little magnet for your pins. So they don't go disappearing and the magnet still works quite well. It looks to have had one of these generic rubber belts put on it at some point, which is fine, it works okay. They're not my favourite. You've got your seam allowances to help you figure out how wide a seam allowance you're sewing. Ah yes. Oh, that's just a simple case of lifting this very heavy machine. Hang on. There we go. There's a little metal bar that sort of sticks out. Like I say, it's not as refined as the Singer, so it does vibrate a little bit. Instead of your stitch tensioner being on the front here, where you might be used to seeing it, it's actually around the side here. It comes with a selection of spools. Unlike many machines of the period, this piece here holds the base down so that you can actually lift the machine up and get inside and service everything. Light, where on my Singer it's a different pod, this one's actually built into the casting. And you have your little switch there. So the pedal on this one's really nice to use. The one on the Singer's a little button, so this is a much nicer pedal. Unfortunately it is with the machine because it's a bit of an unusual connector on it. So I'm going to get this plugged in and then we'll get to using it. And look at a less usual machine. It hasn't been used in quite a long time. It hasn't been serviced by me since I last used it, which would be years ago. Because the problem is, the Singer is, for what I want, a better machine. So this one's been the backup for so long and just never been used that I offered it up on one of the forums. And it will be heading off to a new home where hopefully whoever it's going to is going to cherish it and just do the servicing and things that it actually needs to bring it back to life. It's a good functioning machine and I suspect it will do most that a home sewer needs. There's some nice features on it. The switch for the light, which is just under there, is actually really nice to use. It's in a sensible place. It's not sticky. The one in my Singer is a bit old. I like how chunky the dials are on this. They are very easy to use. I really like this little magnetic thing. I kind of wish my Singer had that, because that's very useful and works very well, stops the pins going away. Instead the Singer just has a metal tray. I actually really like this as well. The extension board on the Singer, there's a little tab there that it sits in, which is fine, it works. But this is just, I don't know, it's more satisfying somehow. So I like that. Some things I don't like about this machine though. I don't like that the tensioner's around there. It just, I mean, you can read it from the front, you can see it while you're sewing and you can adjust it, but I'm just not keen. And the lever here for the foot, again, I keep wanting to reach through the machine to use it, and because of where the bulb is, and it being an incandescent bulb, you do run the risk of just burning your fingers a bit. But an LED bulb would fix that, and learning to use my left hand to use the lever would definitely fix that, so that's not a problem. The motor on this one isn't as grumpy as the one on the Singer, but the mechanism isn't as refined, so it has its good points and its bad points. But overall, it's a great little machine, and if you're looking for something to get started, don't overlook these machines. Just because they don't say Singer on them doesn't mean they're not any good. Old machines like this, a lot of the parts, like the needles and the feet, they're all universal. So an old machine like this can actually do you quite proud. Now that this seam's finished, what we need to do is finish this hem. And it's very, very easy. All you do is take about the width of a thumb or a finger and fold it under, and then pin it in place and go all the way around the cuff. I always find it easiest to start at the side seam here, because it's a good point of reference. And as you do it, you sort of push the fabric, and just push the fabric, and it wants to actually go on its own. So that is one nice thing about this cotton twill. It behaves really nicely, and it feels nice as well. It's got that slight fuzziness. Now there is enough fabric in this hem. I've not made it really tiny because I like a little bit of weight to a hem. And if for any reason in the future I need to drop these, if my legs magically get longer or something, or more likely somebody else ends up with these trousers and they have longer legs than me and want to adjust them, then there'll be some fabric there for them to do that. The only problem with this fabric is it's picked up every single bit of fluff that's been lying around in here. Even fluff I couldn't see. So, I did find for this that I did have some thread, and you saw on the Jones sewing machine I was using the bright red it was threaded with. That's because it didn't really matter, the seams I was doing weren't going to be visible. These seams might be visible, sometimes the hand stitches show through, so I had a look and I have an almost perfect match with this, what's this one? This is Coates Moon, and it is MO17. I don't know the name of the stitch I'm going to use on here, so you'll just have to see me do it and figure out for yourself what stitch I'm using, but I tie on in the usual fashion. So I've doubled the thread and have a loop in the end that I can put the needle through, so that allows me to tie on the thread. And when I get the thread, I sort of hold it in my left hand and then just stretch my arms out until I'm full arm's width, and that's how much I put on the needle, just my full arm span, and that's usually enough to get a good bit of sewing done without having thread tangles, without having to rethread too often. So all I'm doing as I go through is I'm going all the way through both layers on the cuff, but only the top layer of the fabric on this side. So the stitches I use as well, I'm not pulling them tight, I'm leaving a little bit of looseness in these stitches because I want some movement in the cuff. So when I go to the main fabric, with it being twill, this is really good. You can pick up a few threads from the back, and when you look on the front you can see where the needle's pulling, but you can't see the needle, and that's what you're aiming for. And then you pull the thread through and you just enough so it holds that shape, but don't pull tighter. You don't want to be bringing this down to the seam. You can, on some modern machines, some overlockers allow you to do it. There's a kind of like twiddly stitch that does what I'm doing here, but a lot quicker. I'm going fairly slowly here. This is a fairly tough fabric, so it's not the easiest to get the needle through. I hope you're enjoying these videos. It's nice to share a bit of knowledge with people. And sewing needn't be scary. And it's like anything really. You never know until you try. So the worst thing you can do is seek perfection. Never ever seek perfection, because you're just setting yourself up for disappointment when you do that. It's far better to seek to be adequate, set realistic goals, and get more ambitious as you go. And holds true of criticism as well. There are a lot of people out there who seem to delight in telling people how to do something, not because they themselves have any experience of it, but because they've seen it on the internet, they've read it in a book, their mate Dave doesn't do it like that. And so it's not your place to criticise. If all you're doing by criticising somebody is bringing them down, you're not doing it to help them, you're doing it to just prove how rubbish they are at something. Well, you're not helping. That's not the job of a critic. I think the world would be a better place if we lifted one another up, celebrated our victories, whatever they might be. For some of us, that's just getting dressed in the morning, especially these days. For some of us it's a big physical challenge, like climbing a mountain. Some of it is smaller things, it's getting through a day. You should never let a critic take away your personal victories. Just because your personal victory is small to somebody else doesn't mean it's small to you. So, it's tied off in the usual fashion, and because I'm on camera, consistency is not my strong suit when I'm on camera, so it doesn't matter that this is fine. It's not a seam that anybody sees but you and I, so this will be perfectly adequate, which sort of reinforces what I was just rumbling on about. And then when you're on the outside, once this is pressed, the most you see the light just picking up where the stitches are. So once these have been pressed, once they've been given a wash and then given a press, this will all settle out and these little marks will go away. That's all the hems now done. This one's a bit more even. For some reason in the middle the fabric's just the way it's relaxing because it's not been pressed yet. It's just making these middle stitches look a bit smaller, but they're not, they're quite even. So the next thing you have to do is take out the basting thread, which is easier to do with two hands. But basically you just snip the knot where you've tied it on, tied it off, and then just pull that out. And then we can get this pressed, and then try them on and make sure they're okay. Oh, did you think I could buy a pair of trousers without the button coming off? Well, I can't. One of the first things that happened when I tried these on is this button, as soon as I put it through the buttonhole, came off. Every single time. If you've watched the other sewing videos, you'll have seen me do buttons. And there you go. Sewing a button on is nice and quick and easy. It's also why it's one of the very first things they say you should do with hand sewing. And that goes through no problem. Got the hems done. Just shy of 4 inches taken off the bottom of these. I did do some measuring. I was sure that my inside leg is 30 to 31 depending on the trousers. And when I measured these, they're 28 inside leg. But I measured myself and some other pairs of trousers that are a more traditional cut, so a slightly higher waist, slightly looser leg, and they're all 30-31 and they fit the same way. So I think this must just be, because these trousers sit quite low, it's making the inseam start lower down my thigh than it would do normally. So that's something to be aware of when you're actually adjusting trousers or any clothing to fit yourself. Put them on, and wherever possible, actually make the adjustments and the amendments on yourself. Because just measuring them to match your measurements, if I'd measured these trousers to a 30-31 inside leg, they'd just be puddling around my feet, which isn't what I want. So definitely be aware of that, because when I first measured them, I thought I'd shrunk, and then I would have had to change my name to Twit. Let's get these pressed.